Welcome to Marking the End Times. I'm Mark Hitchcock, and we're here with a group from the church I pastor back in Edmond, Oklahoma, from Faith Bible Church. And we're here on a Journeys of Paul trip to Greece. So, you guys, why don't you give a round of applause so I know you guys are here. So, there we go. Yeah, there's a group of people here with us. So, it's great to be with you guys today. We're here we've been to a lot of different sites already, but the site we're at right now is ancient Agay. We would call it maybe Agi, pronounce it different ways. It's modern Virginia, but this site is the burial place of Philip II, who is the father of Alexander the Great. And many people believe, they'll say, he's called Philip B. Sometimes they call him Philip B. It's A and B. Philip B. or Philip II. Many people will say he's the greatest man ever produced by Europe. And his burial site is here. Now, we don't have the burial site of Alexander the Great, his son. Alexander died in Babylon. His body was taken back to Alexandria. We don't really know where it is today, but this is the burial site of his father. Now, what I want to do is talk about since we're up in this area of Macedonia where Philip II was, near where Alexander the Great was born, talk about some prophecies in the Bible about Alexander the Great. We just came from the city of Thessaloniki, and there we talked about some future prophecies. The book of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians tell us about the coming rapture, the day of the Lord, the tribulation, the coming rise of the Antichrist. And one of the good questions we really should ask is, well, how do we know that those things are really going to happen in the future? I mean, anybody can prophesy and say what's going to happen in the future, but the only way that we can really know for sure that future prophecies are going to happen and be literally fulfilled is if we have prophecies that have already taken place and been fulfilled. And there are about 1,000 prophecies in the Bible, and about 500 of those have been fulfilled, and about 500 are yet to be fulfilled. And the Bible has 500 prophecies fulfilled with 100% accuracy, 100% of the time. Now, that's quite a track record. So we can know that these future prophecies, these end-time prophecies, will be literally fulfilled just as the Bible says. And in Daniel chapter 8, we have some unbelievable prophecies of Alexander the Great that have been fulfilled. Now, I like to call Daniel chapter 8 East versus West, or you could call it How the West Won, because it's the conflict between the Greeks and the Persians, between Alexander the Great and the Persian Empire. So let me read a few of these verses, and I want to talk about some really astounding fulfilled prophecies. It starts out in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar. Now, if you know anything about the book of Daniel, he was actually killed back in chapter 5. So this is kind of a flashback. It's not always in chronological order. Chapter 7 of Daniel was in the 1st year of King Belshazzar. It says, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. So the one in chapter 7. And I saw in the vision, when I was in Susa, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. So Daniel's in Babylon, but he's taken in a vision to Susa, which is 225 miles away. And at the time Daniel's writing this, about 530, 550 BC, that's a very insignificant city that later became the capital of the Persian Empire. So he's taken there all the way to Persia in a vision. And he says, and I saw in the vision, I was in the Ulai Canal, which is in the city of Susa. I raised my eyes and saw, behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had 2 horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Now, this is a picture of the Persian Empire. So what you have in Daniel chapter 2, if you remember, Daniel sees the great vision of the statue. And you have these 4 great world empires. You have gold, silver, bronze, and legs of iron and legs of iron. And it pictures the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and then the Roman Empire. And then in Daniel 7, he sees those same empires again, but now they're pictured as wild beasts. The first is a lion, that's Babylon. Then you have this bear, that's Persia. Then this leopard, that's the Greek Empire. And then this kind of horrible beast with 10 horns that pictures the Roman Empire. But so you have all 4 of the empires in chapter 2, all 4 in chapter 7. When you get to chapter 8, it focuses just on the middle 2, just on Persia and Greece. And one of the symbols of the Persian Empire was a ram. When they go into battle, a lot of times you have these huge ram, a symbol of a ram's head. So the Persian Empire is being pictured here as a ram. And it's interesting, there's two horns, and one was higher than the other, and the higher one is the one that came up last. Well, the empire was the Medo-Persian Empire. The Median part rose first. The Persian part came later, but the Persian part was dominant. So he's writing this at the time, the Persian Empire at this time is in place. And so this, you'll read this and say, well, okay, that's not that great a prophecy. We'll keep reading. Saw the ram charging westward, northward, southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. This is the Persian Empire. And I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram and was enraged against him, struck the ram, broke his two horns, and the ram had no power to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great. But when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up four conspicuous horns towards the four winds of heaven. Now, we don't have to use our own imagination to figure out who the ram and the goat are, because when you go further on in the chapter, it tells us. So I always like this. There's a lot of prophecies in the Bible or passages that have what I call the built-in interpretation. They tell you what it means. So when you go to chapter 8, verse 20, it says, as for the ram you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. The goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. It's going to be Alexander the Great. And as for the horn that was broken, in place of it, four others arose. Four kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. So this is an incredible prophecy, again, written 200 years before Alexander the Great comes on the scene of the rise of the Greek Empire. So let me just mention these prophecies that are fulfilled here. By the way, I'll say this. The ram was the symbol of Persia. The goat was the symbol of Greece. This area here, we would call it maybe a G. It's called Agay here. That word means goat. Because remember, there was an oracle at Delphi that said, whenever you find a herd of goats, that's the place you're to start this city. So they named the city the goat, named it after a goat. And again, there's different ideas about the Aegean Sea, but some would call the Aegean Sea the Goat Sea, that the sea will be sailing on. So here it is, 200 years ahead of time, and this goat is being used as a symbol of the Greek Empire. But let me just mention these quickly, that the first prophecy is fulfilled is just the rise of the Greek Empire. So 200 years ahead of time, it prophesies the rise of the Greek Empire. The second prophecy is the reputation of this great king. Notice it says that this goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. And it goes on, this is fascinating to me, in chapter 8 and verse 8, it says, the goat became exceedingly great. Well, what was Alexander known as? Alexander the Great. So it's telling us here that this king is going to have an incredible reputation. He's this great goat and this great horn. So Alexander literally was the goat. Right? What do we call the goat? The greatest of all time, right? He is the goat, the greatest leader, a really military leader of all time. So you have the rise of the Greek Empire, then you have this great king that arises. And then you have the routing of the Persian Empire in verses 5 to 7. I won't read that again, but the Persians had invaded Greece twice, once in 490 BC and again in 480 BC. And by the way, in 480 BC, that king that invaded them, Xerxes, that's the whole story. That's who Esther was married to. The whole story of Esther is kind of a background for that. So the Greeks wanted to get back at the Persians for a long period of time. Philip II was preparing for this. We'll see his tomb there. Philip II was assassinated in 336 BC. And Alexander the Great, 2 years later in 334, leads the Greek army when he's 22 years of age against the Persians. And he takes an army of about, there's varying thoughts about how large it was, 35,000. They cross the Hellespont. They meet a Persian army there at a place called the Granicus River. That's the first battle they fight. And they rout the Persians, kind of have a smaller army there. They rout them there. And as Alexander goes along, he picks up more troops. But really one of the decisive battles, and by the way, he has his war horse. We saw the sculpture of that, remember yesterday in Thessaloniki, Bucephalus. The next battle is a place called Issus. And it's one of the great battles of ancient history. It's 333 BC. Many believe Alexander was outnumbered maybe 3-1. And he has an incredible strategy. But when things began falling apart at the Battle of Issus, Alexander on his war horse leads his cavalry himself. He wasn't one of these guys that stood back and watched the battle happen. He leads them himself at the front, right through the middle of the Persian lines, breaks their lines, and heads straight for the place where Darius III, the Persian king's back there watching it. He's got his wife with him, his family. In fact, this group, Alexander heads straight for him. And he takes off and flees, and when the troops see him fleeing, they all began to flee as well, and it's just basically a slaughter at that point. And so it's one of the great battles of ancient history, the Battle of Issus. So after Alexander wins there, he knows he's pretty much got the Persians defeated, so he heads down south and goes along the coast and goes and conquers ancient Tyre. Nebuchadnezzar besieged Tyre for like 7 years and couldn't take it. Alexander the Great took it in 7 months. And he goes on down, and I won't have time to go into this in huge detail, but he comes down to Jerusalem. And Josephus tells the story how Alexander the Great, the only city he doesn't conquer on the way down there is the city of Jerusalem. And what happens is the priest there has a vision of God, from God, to go out, open the doors of the city, put on all their white robes, and go out and meet Alexander the Great as he's approaching. So that's what they do. I mean, not a very good strategy. And Josephus says that when Alexander sees him, the only time he ever did this, he bowed down to this high priest. And his men actually picked him up and said, you don't bow down to anybody. But what happened is, they didn't know this, at Dion, which is near here, that's where Paul left this area to go down to Athens. At Dion, that's where the Greeks would gather before they'd go to big battles up here in Macedonia. When they're gathered at Dion, before they go to Persia, Alexander the Great had a dream. He had a dream that he was going to meet some people in white robes who were going to come out and greet him, and he was not to destroy their city. So it's all in Josephus. And so the story is told by Josephus that actually when Jaddua, the high priest, comes out to meet Alexander the Great, he actually brought a copy of the book of Daniel. And he showed him this, what we're reading here in Daniel chapter 8. And Daniel saw this as a prophecy that he then was going to crush the Persians and be this great king. Now, I don't know if he read on down about the part that the great horn is going to be broken and his kingdom divided into 4 parts, but it's a fascinating story, and you can actually read about it in Zechariah chapter 9. Zechariah 9 is all of the exploits of Alexander the Great, and it talks there in Zechariah 9, which Zechariah is written in 520 BC, 200 years before Alexander, that the city of Jerusalem would be spared.